Hi, my name is Mesa and I did my research project on the Maoris people of New Zealand. I'm going to talk about the early history of the Maoris people, which includes the rivalment, settlement, and the killing off the Maoris people. Then I'll talk a little bit about their background, history, and culture. I'm going to start off with the rivalment and settlement of the Maoris people and what happened when new settlers came to the land. Then I'll move on to talk about their general cultural values and their beliefs. Enjoy! Maori legends are that the first person to arrive in New Zealand 10,000 years ago was a man named Kupe, adventuring from his Polynesian fatherland called Hawaii, which is the land Maori's people originated. Back in his hometown, Kupe did not have luck with fishing. His real purpose for venturing off to the ocean was to kill an octopus that belonged to one of his competitors in Hawaii. He went to such great lengths to kill the octopus that he ended up drifting all the way to New Zealand. The currents in the ocean, winds, and stars guided him across the Pacific while sailing in his canoe. When he arrived to the land, Kupe settled down in northern lands of New Zealand. Soon later, the first groups from Polynesia descent started to arrive. Later, these people would be known as Maoris people, but they did not identify themselves by that name when they first came to the land. The Maoris people settled across the shores of the oceans, and some settled inshore. The population of the Maoris at the time of the settlements were estimated to be roughly 300 to 400 people, all from Polynesia and Southeast Asia descents. On the left side, you can see where the land is traced with red. That is where Kupe first settled in New Zealand. On the bottom right is a colorized idea of what Kupe looked like. Then, in 1642, Europeans started to recognize the land's existence. Abel Tasman was one of the first European explorers to discover New Zealand, where he came across the Maoris people. This is when the Maori came up with their name to distinguish themselves from those who traveled there, which is also the name they use to this day. Abel encountered the Maoris people, and the Maoris used scare tactics to scare them away, both no luck. The Dutch's way of scaring the Maori was to fire a cannon at their land. Maori, obviously furious, went out the next morning to kill off 4 of Abel's sailors, and then they fled the area soon after. After a month of staying in New Zealand, Abel left the country and named where the killings happened Mortimer's Bay, which translates to Murderer's Bay. A photo of Abel is located on the left side of this slide. Then next to arrive in New Zealand 127 years later, after the first European encounter, was a British traveler named James Cook, located on the right side. October 1769 was when Cook first arrived in the southern lands known as Poverty Bay. Although he was only merely exploring for a scientific project, the British saw it as a way to expand their empire and to trade the land's resources. James Cook and his encounter with the Maoris people were very friendly because he did not want Maoris to dislike his crew and himself. This was a way that James could come back to the country 2 more times in 1773 and 1777. Today, he is still remembered by significance of geographically mapping out what is New Zealand today. So on the left is what New Zealand looks like today, mapped out by James Cook himself. And on the right side is Poverty Bay, where James Cook had first came to New Zealand. Next, in 1809, Maoris people killed 66 Europeans because they disrespected a chief's son. The killings resulted in acts of cannibalism told by some of the survivors. Before the 1840s, there was little to no contact with the Europeans because of the massacre known as the Boyd Massacre. Everyone did not want to interfere with the Maoris people. In the 1830s, many Maoris people started to die from the diseases brought in by the Europeans. Measles, common flu, and many more killed many of the Maoris people. During this time period, musket wars broke out and resulted in a decrease of Maoris population, while many became or were forced to become fugitive and subjugated. The Europeans had brought in muskets to trade with those living on the land, claiming it was powerful and useful. During the musket wars, thousands of Maoris died and 18,000 died in total from the musket wars, which all happened between 1810 and 1840. The whole population back then in New Zealand was only 100,000, so this battle took a big toll on the country's population, resulting in 1/5 of the population depleted. Each tribe at the time fought for the muskets and often traded with one another, which only resulted in depletion of some of the tribes. This was also a way of Maoris people seeking revenge for the domination that occurred in the past. The boundaries and territories were also changed from the war because of many not surviving and tribes being killed off, which shaped what is New Zealand today. Once the Musket Wars ended and diseases were taking over tribes, Maoris people were forced to flee their area and make room for European settlement. The Europeans saw the Maoris as in the way of their colonization, and the Maoris people were considered to be a race. Soon after, the British started to colonize on the land in the 1830s. A British resident named James Busby took over the entire empire of the English. In 1834, the British government, which is now known as the Crown, chose the country's flag to represent the country, as well as 25 chiefs coming from northern areas came to Busby to pick a flag to represent New Zealand. On the left side is the flag that represented New Zealand and is called the United Tribes flag. This was also the first flag to represent New Zealand. On the left side is the flag that represents New Zealand today. A year later, they brought in the Declaration of Independence of New Zealand. And then the next thing to be brought in was the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed by over 500 chiefs on February 6, 1840. It is considered one of the most memorable treaties in the world because it makes up New Zealand's modernized government law. It also ensured that the Maoris people were the founding people of New Zealand. The leader of the British Crown at the time was Captain William Hobson. This signing also ensured that Indigenous people were able to live, use resources, protect their land, and have some of the same rights as the British did. This also let Hobson take over the land and build his colony. Over the years, when colonization kept growing throughout the country, the Maoris population was down to 6% of the population, when in the 1800s, Maoris people had made up 98% of the population. This led the Maoris people to be dominated by the British settlers, and they only saw the land owned by Maoris people as more room for settlement. But many of the Maoris' land they owned was considered to be a wasteland. From all the colonization that had happened in New Zealand, they had become big exporters of meat, dairy products, and farming goods, which was all exported by ship. After the 1840s or during, the British also made trade policies and partners with other countries around the world, expanding the trade industry. In the 1870s, they started to export wool, practice farming, trade native timber, and mine gold. They exported and traded these goods with countries like Australia and Britain because of the English. This was crucial for the economic and financial growth, although they made Maoris slaves in farming and whaling practices. Overall, colonization has affected Maoris people's life expectancy and starting to kill off hundreds of Maoris people from the colonizers' diseases they had brought into the country. They were also forced to sell their ancestral land for colonizers to grow their colony and to expand countrywide. The overcrowding of the lands led to poor living conditions, losing their resources, poor diets, and health issues. The Maoris people's life expectancy also plummeted due to unhygienic lifestyles with the land that the British Crown had left them. Now we'll move on to the culture and general knowledge of the Maoris people. The language. The Maoris people's language, Tirio, which means Maoris language, evolved in Aotearoa hundreds of years ago. The Maoris people had no official written language. Instead, carvings, symbols, and weavings were all understood by the Maoris tribes. Many attempted to write out the language in early 1800s, but to no avail. Maori people started to teach everyone all over the country how to read and write their language. During the core of the 1800s, it was expected that many were able to speak the Maoris language. Although during this time period everyone was encouraged to write and speak in Maori language, they overturned their decision and wanted to get rid of the Maoris people. By the late 1860s, most of New Zealand's country was dominated by the English language, resulting in Maori's language being deterred. The Europeans wanted everyone to start speaking English, so they punished those that did not speak English in all of the schools, much like what happened in residential schools. Even though the language was discouraged at the time, Maoris people overcame the challenges and protected their language for all these years, and the language is still alive and well to this day. Even many New Zealand groups have started up Maori language camps or classes to revitalize the Maoris language. The Maoris people also had specific roles due to their gender like many other cultures, most of which they had practiced every day of their lives. The Maoris women were not able to fight in the war, dance in the war dances, and have traditional full facial tattoos. Maoris women were deemed sacred because they were able to carry and develop newborns, as the men usually died from all the conflict and battles. The only way a man could mate with a woman is if they were to survive battles, determining that they were strong and capable of having a child. The Maoris men's roles were to defend the land and hunt for resources while still maintaining to respect the Maoris women. And unlike most cultures, the Maoris people had both the men and women cook food. This is because they see women as more important and men as disposable. Despite women not being able to do as much as the men, they were given some specific roles. These include making the call for important meetings, picking the song to entertain the guests, dance and tell stories to share their wisdom. In our modern day society, the Maori gender roles have changed due to colonization. They have developed modern European lifestyle habits like most of the world today, but are in fact still respective towards the woman. Tomoko was the word used to describe the traditional Maoris tattooing. The differences between a Maoris tattoo and an English version of a tattoo is that Maoris tattoos are a practice of scarring and chiseling of the person's skin. The English version of tattoos mark the skin with ink and needles. Often the tattoo is on the face, buttocks, shoulders, or chin of those who receive one. Each tattoo holds a message from the ancestral tribes and tells the story of the wearer's family, tribal bondage, and their job as a person. The tattoo's message also represents the person's wisdoms, social standing, power, and pedigree. The right side of the face was based on your mother's history, and the left side is about your father's history. To get a Tomoko tattoo was an honor because it told people about their responsibility and place in life. The more tattoos you had, the higher rank you were within the community. However, women were not able to get tattoos above their lip because Maori's people seen women as beautiful and wanted to keep them presentable. And to this day, many people still get Tomoko tattoos. So yeah, that's all I have for today. Hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something. And yeah, that's it. Bye.